So, Michael, when you evaluate tools like Retool, what made you consider building spreadsheet-based mini apps instead?
I'd say the biggest thing, about 80% of it just comes down to time and resources. I think, something like Retool, it's great and it can make pretty UIs, but it can take a lot of time. And if you don't do it right, it can take even more time to debug it. Whereas with a spreadsheet, it's pretty straightforward, no matter what kind of tools you're using, and it's very flexible as far as what kind of changes you can make.
In your organization right now at AppFusion, like what use cases did you originally think needed Retool or a similar platform, but you ended up actually solving them with the spreadsheet?
I'd say one of the biggest ones probably would be a report I made for visibility on return labels and file attachments. As you know, you can't, drag and drop a file into a spreadsheet or, preview a PDF in a spreadsheet. And so my initial interpretation was I might need to do this in Retool and give that kind of visibility to where you could have a table and click a preview link to view a full file. Ultimately, though, I just decided why not give it a try in a spreadsheet because it would be very simple and straightforward. I'm essentially just pulling the URLs for the files from our database in our AWS S3 instance. It's been perfectly sufficient. It's worked great. There's really no need to shift it over to Retool, and I don't intend to.
And so when you like what made you kind of think it sounds like you were already leveraging those tools that you're, using the links for in spreadsheet. So what made you think of that? Is it something you had done before, or is that just like a natural inclination to you to like try to solve problems in this situation?
I'd say natural inclination. It was something early on when I started messing around with the file storage aspect that was a challenge, but it was one that felt like an easy solution to just throw a hyperlink in there. And Google Sheets is very adaptable as far as hyperlinks go.
And so what was the actual first internal tool at AppFusion or mini app that you built in a spreadsheet that's actually now running in Retool, and why? Why did you shift it over to Retool?
The first one and probably the biggest project of them was a report I made for visibility on our messaging portal for our internal team. Our application, it's an e-commerce platform. We're an intermediary. Our buyers and sellers communicate with each other in our messaging portal, and it's really one of the most key aspects of our application, but it's also one of the oldest and most outdated. And for us to view a conversation, we have to impersonate a user. It's a very complicated and time-consuming process. I had originally built a report where you could plug in an order number and it would spit out a full conversation with conditional formatting to make it look like a message conversation. That was pretty sufficient, but after some time, about a year and a half, people on my team were coming to me asking, like, is it possible for us to send a message? And you can't do a post call. You can't manipulate from a spreadsheet. I know Coefficient does allow it, but in the sense that we needed it, would have needed to go through an API. And so that was the original motivation to move it over. But I will say, it's worth noting that spreadsheet took me less than a day to build. The Retool application took 2-3 weeks full time, and I still have to go back to it on a weekly basis and fix a bug here and there. So,
Oh, and I mean, obviously, it sounds like because of the build time, like you're a resource, right? And you're in a fast-growing organization, but you don't have all the resources in the world. So time is a big thing here. And 2 weeks can be a real time suck, especially when you have to go in every week at this point. So it sounds like you really do everything you can to stay in a spreadsheet for its flexibility. But at some point, you do hit a wall, and that's when you take the time to build.
yeah, that's exactly correct.
So when you moved things over to Retool, and then at this point you're, having to go in there every week to tweak something, was there anything surprisingly better or more efficient in your original spreadsheet version than in Retool?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest thing is just how flexible a spreadsheet is. And you can change anything at any time. If something breaks, it takes a matter of minutes sometimes to fix it. Whereas in Retool, it can take, hours just to figure out the root of a bug, let alone address it and fix it. And then, it's a spider web. You touch one thing and it affects 10 other things. Whereas in a spreadsheet, the formulas, they're so easily visible and accessible that very simple to make changes.
So when do you think orgs should leverage their spreadsheet as an ETL versus traditional ETL platforms?
I'd say the biggest thing is if that person lacks experience in hand building or hand coding an ETL pipeline, particularly Python, it can be very time consuming. I would say I'm only like moderately experienced with it, and it can take, I mean, days. Sometimes what seems like it might take an hour can take days. So that's something to always keep in mind. And there are tools like Coefficient available with spreadsheets that make it possible to do, like a full multi-stage ETL pipeline that otherwise would have taken you days or weeks to build. Another thing is if it would otherwise be difficult to slot that in their development roadmap, I'd say, most of the people watching this video probably work on the revenue operations side. And while that can get very technical, it can be very different from what developers are working on, and it can sometimes be hard to prioritize that kind of work in a development pipeline. I mean, sometimes, for a complicated workflow, developers, might be the only people who can do it. So it's something to think about. But another one would be if you want to avoid incurring a massive cost on an ETL platform, we do use one, and I will say it's very expensive. It's not cheap. For a long time before that, we were using Coefficient for everything, and it got the job done. So yeah, if you're not looking to spend, a massive amount on the SaaS platform, an additional SaaS platform, that's something to think about. Another thing is if you're doing relatively simple data syncing, like say you just need to put the average number of orders per month for a user into a property in HubSpot. It's basically just a one-to-one match. It can be very easy and can be very, very quick and simple to do in a spreadsheet. Another thing too is if the data that you're wanting to sync is exclusively available only in Google Sheets, like it's a manual tracker, you're taking notes from calls, why, configure an API to pull that data from your spreadsheet to pull it into a script to then write it somewhere when you could just do it straight from the spreadsheet.
And so you mentioned HubSpot, so I kind of want to like double down there. It sounds like you're creating some calculated properties inside of your spreadsheet and then pushing them back to HubSpot. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. So the start of the pipeline would be pulling data, sometimes aggregated, sometimes just raw data from our database into a spreadsheet, applying formulas to it, sometimes combining data from different sources in that spreadsheet, and then writing it directly to HubSpot using Coefficient.
And is there a reason, it could be because of the blending that you mentioned, but is there a reason that you're not doing, because I know HubSpot does have calculated properties. So is there a reason you're not leveraging theirs? Have you tried them before? Or did you just go straight to Coefficient because that's what you're comfortable with?
I'm much more comfortable. It takes, 10 seconds to create a formula in a spreadsheet, and it takes minutes, sometimes longer than that, to create a property in HubSpot.
I think about like troubleshooting too, like troubleshooting a HubSpot calculated property is not fun. So.
Yeah. Another thing too is you have to be able to get the raw data into HubSpot to be able to calculate based off of it. And that's what we're using Coefficient for. So may as well just bundle it all together.
Yeah. So basically it sounds like you're pulling some other data from a database. You're instead of piping that data over just straight as it is because you don't need it, you need to blend it and calculate. You're just doing all of that in a spreadsheet, pushing that like perfectly clean property into HubSpot.
Yeah, it's worth noting as well that there aren't many ways to just simply port directly from a database to HubSpot. It's not as simple as it sounds. That's what those expensive SaaS platforms do. Coefficient can do it perfectly well without even necessarily intending to do it, but it does.
So how are you handling data pipelines before using Sheets?
Truthfully, we really weren't, at least on the operation side. Like our developers have always had different kinds of data pipelines, but nothing really relevant to us. Before using spreadsheets, I essentially just had to teach myself Python and do it by hand in Python scripts. Yeah, not fun, but good learning opportunity, I guess. But yeah, and then I just quickly realized that most of the time I was spending could be very easily avoided on a system I was familiar with.
And so what made you, when you started developing kind of ETL pipelines, did you go straight to a spreadsheet? It sounds like from an ops perspective, maybe your like development team is using an ETL platform, but from an ops perspective, like you just went straight to like, I'm not going down that path. I'm just going to do something really easy in a spreadsheet.
That's exactly it. Like I said, I dabbled a little bit in, like Python scripts for small things. Once we decided we needed a significant amount of data in HubSpot, the first place I turned was spreadsheets and Coefficient, and we used it consistently as our sole source of our data pipeline in Coefficient for about a year. It worked perfectly fine.
Can you give an example of how you used Sheets as a lightweight ETL pipeline?
Yeah, of course. So the primary thing was sort of what I addressed a moment ago with just simple data points about our customers, health metrics, KPIs, order data about our customers, our users, and the companies, getting that into HubSpot. We had 2 or 3 different spreadsheets with about, I'd say, each of them having about 10 different tabs of data that we're syncing, of all of the basic relevant data about our customers that would sync to the companies and the contacts in HubSpot. I'd say about 100 properties per object every hour for all of our data.
Oh, that's amazing. That's awesome. It sounds scary. And then it's like, oh, it was actually really easy to set up.
Yeah.
Can you describe a time when spreadsheet workflows helped you identify or close a product gap that you had on your team?
Yeah, of course. I'd say a good example that happened relatively recently is that we had that it had been observed by a couple of people on our customer success team, just sort of as like an anecdote. They didn't know for sure, but it seemed potentially concerning that every once in a while they'd noticed that we were having customers on our retail website that were overpaying or underpaying for a product that essentially the data didn't line up. And I put together a report using Coefficient, refreshing every hour, that would pull in aggregates of all that data of the under and over payments, essentially. And what we identified was that it was really only about a combined 1.5% of all of our orders that this was an issue with. And our product team was perfectly fine with that. 1.5% doesn't sound so bad. What I was also able to identify with that report, though, is that on the underpayment side, it was about a monthly net loss of around $8,000, and I was able to show that, pretty clearly. And we, as you can imagine, got it addressed pretty quickly. We don't see that issue anymore.
So, what role did automation or Sheets play in surfacing product or process blind spots for your team?
I'd say the biggest thing is, for me, it's about building an ops solution for my team that allows them to do something they weren't otherwise able to do, or do it a lot quicker. I'd say in a perfect world, that would translate into product solutions for our team internally that allow us to do those things through the platform. But I'd say, in all of this, the biggest testament to Coefficient is that hasn't happened because it hasn't needed to happen. Because we find the issue, we address it in a spreadsheet, our team uses it, and it solves the problem, and it works in perpetuity. So, it'd be great to see some of those things in the product.
Of course.
They don't, in some senses, they don't need to be.
Yeah, it's like, oh, they don't need to be. And it's like, if we can advance something else while you guys just like support this little bitty gap here, and it sounds like it's like pretty quick to build, then we're good. We'll keep moving on and doing more things that will allow more people to buy our product. So
Exactly.
Did you build anything that helps stakeholders proactively monitor gaps or changes in user behavior?
Yeah, of course. I'd say most of the spreadsheets I build, if they are for reporting in particular, are doing that. On the product side, I'd say the biggest one would be a report we just worked on, which highlights over and under payments on orders on our retail website. It just shows week over week or month over month all of the under and over payments and percentages and amounts. Additionally, on the user performance and behavior and health side, we have a pretty massive dashboard that we use in Google Sheets that tells us basically anything and everything you could ever imagine about the performance of a customer who sells our parts on eBay. What they have listed, how often they're listing, the ups and the downs, and the order performance.
So can you walk us through a dashboard that you've built in Sheets that is dynamic, that your team can leverage and sort and filter through as needed on the go?
Yeah, of course. I'd say a good example of this would be a dashboard we built to track order performance comparatively to Google Ads performance on our retail website. I'd say starting from the top, the dashboard has a refresh button. So in the top, you just click refresh, and all of your new data appears. It also updates every hour. From there, it has pretty extensive filtering in the top bar, where you can select if you want to see all of your data aggregated by day, week, month, or quarter, and it will just dynamically change how that report appears, as well as all of the charts within it. Additionally, you can select whether you want to see a multi-select dropdown for used, new, or reconditioned parts, as well as the ability to change how different figures are amortized on how we recognize our revenue, for whether or not it's, our CEO or our accountant looking at it, those types of things, as well as, conditional formatting, so you can see the best week of the whole list of weeks for a given value, those types of things.
And so how do you keep the dashboard updated and relevant across your teams?
Most often, this sort of just comes down to one of the basic aspects of Coefficient. If you're just talking about keeping data up to date, it's doing it on its own. You don't ever have to think about it, which is wonderful. I can't understate that enough. From there, though, if we're talking about different teams accessing the same data, generally what I'll do is I'll have one import with the raw data, and then whatever the required number of tabs are for the required number of teams, each tab essentially showing the same data, but aggregated in a slightly different way for whoever it's most relevant to.
Awesome. And when you're like, you build dynamic dashboards all the time, so what are some of the formulas or logic that are your go-tos for dynamic dashboards?
Yeah, of course. I'd say there's a lot. I'll try to keep it short, but I'd say one of the biggest ones, especially when you're talking about things where you have a search bar, drop downs,
Yeah.
or you're trying to parse a large amount of data, would be regular expressions, like regex match in particular, just for validating that whatever's been inputted is correct. It can also help you from a security standpoint as well. I won't go down that rabbit hole, but it allows you essentially to validate that the inputs are as expected. As far as data that's not aggregated, in particular, the biggest things would be filter. I'd say filter is probably the most common that I use. Aside from that, it would be array formulas. Within an array formula, I'm usually doing if statements, let formulas, VLOOKUPs, XLOOKUPs, those types of things. And then if we're aggregating data, generally speaking, it's going to be a combination of COUNTIFs and SUMIFs.
So how do you typically describe Coefficient to others?
For me, I couldn't survive without it. That's what I tell people, and it's the truth, really. It's kind of funny, but essentially say if I ever took another job, one of the fringe benefits would have to be that they have to get Coefficient. Or I wouldn't work for them. It's true. I couldn't think of a world or a day-to-day job without it, in an operations position at least.
That's amazing. I love to hear that. No, me neither. I was when I first discovered it, I was where has it been? Where has it been and why didn't I have this before?
Exactly.
So what advice would you give to someone considering using Coefficient for the first time?
I'd say don't overcomplicate it for yourself. There's, a lot of different connectors, in particular on the SQL side. If you're not super familiar with SQL, just kind of start small, right? Use the AI features that are available to help you write simple queries. One of the beautiful things about spreadsheets is that they are versatile. And so you don't need to know how to write a 200-line, query to aggregate data and do window functions and all that, when you can just pull a raw data set, refresh it every hour, and mess around with formulas in the spreadsheet to combine it however you want.
What is your favorite Coefficient feature and why?
I'd say aside from the most basic one, which is data refreshes, aside from that, probably the ability to parameterize queries in SQL. One of the biggest challenges with a spreadsheet is that you only get 10 million cells in Google Sheets in particular. And even with that, if you get anywhere close to that, your spreadsheet's going to have a hard time loading if you have complicated formulas in there. The ability to add in a simple parameter in a query to say user typed in their order number on this tab. Now, when it refreshes, it's going to use that order number to pull only the 10 relevant messages as opposed to the 900,000. It makes it a lot easier to use.
Yeah, I think that is where all of your mini apps started, right? It's
Yeah.
can't have all of this data in here at once. We need to be able to filter it. And what is all the data in here at once useful for anyway? You're still gonna have to filter it in some way. So if there was just one reason you'd tell someone to try Coefficient, what would you say?
I say that it's a tough question. There's so many, but the one thing would be the ability to automatically refresh your data. People spend so much time building spreadsheet reports, and the first step of that is always pulling a bunch of data together from different places and putting it in there. You've now just spent 75% of the time you were going to spend on this project just getting data into your spreadsheet. If you never have to think about that again, then you can spend 100% of your time building really awesome dashboards and just have the data there.